you, and welcome to the Edge broadcast.
All righty.
Hey, we're going to talk about alien in the mirror. And last time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see one, but I have been considered an alien in some of my thoughts and opinions. Randall, but before we get going, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly. My name is Randall Fitzgerald. I write books for a living, but I started out as a newspaper reporter and then as a magazine editor, and had my first book published in 1979, and it was titled The Complete Book of Extraterrestrial Encounters.
Wow.
So I've been involved in this subject, as you can tell, for quite a number of years. I keep doing deeper and deeper dives into the subject matter.
Wow. Well, we've had a number of alien guests or guests have talked about the alien question before, and now alien in the mirror is that where are you suggesting there has been some messing around with human DNA?
Actually, there are multiple meanings for the title. One meaning is that if we hold the mirror of human evolution up to this phenomenon, whatever it is, that we see reflected back a lot of the mysteries of our own existence. The UFO phenomenon is full of mystery, and alien visitation as a subject is
Mm-hmm.
rather mysterious, as evidenced by the popularity of the ancient uh, astronaut subject matter on television. So we hold the mirror of evolution up, and we see reflected back many of the mysteries of our own origins.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there is the theory that humans were seeded on this planet,
Mm-hmm.
and as a species, we evolved here, and our origins are elsewhere. So that's also an alien aspect of this.
Mm-hmm. Um, for that to have occurred, uh, would it be that it's more likely they came here and adjusted the DNA, or they put us here to begin with?
I can only speculate, of course, because I'm a journalist, and basically what I do is I don't have a strong point of view one way
Mm-hmm.
or the other. I just try to follow the evidence as I find it, where it goes. I try to apply critical thinking. So when you give me options like that as to what may have transpired in prehistory, I,
Mm-hmm.
like you or anyone else, can only speculate at, but I don't have an opinion or a strong opinion about
Mm-hmm.
much of
So,
anything in this realm.
so obviously, okay. So I understand it. So you're open to different ideas on the matter. What's your or have you considered intelligent design, say from a creator standpoint?
Not in this book, no.
Hmm.
No, I don't
But
really
but
deal with
wouldn't that be almost like an elephant in the room type of thing? Wouldn't that should be considered when one asks the question whether or not or how humans got here?
Certainly, and it probably should be. Um, Let me point, because my book covers a lot of territory
Hmm.
from 1919 on in terms of the literature and the subject matter. 1975 was a big year for books to be published in this realm. And there are two in particular in connection with your question that I would point you to. Uh,
Hmm.
the Reverend Billy Graham had a book that came out in which he uh, considered UFOs as perhaps being piloted by angels, and that they were here to help humankind battle satanic forces. And then the same year, 1975, two evangelical Christians came out with another book. Let me make certain I have this title correct. Yes, What on Earth is Happening? In which they argued that UFO occupants are demons. So
Hmm.
you had two contradictory points of view about the nature and the origin of this particular phenomenon. And when we think in terms of intelligent design, if we put a religious spin on it, we can come up with a number of different uh, possibilities of how to interpret the true nature of such intelligent design.
Hmm. Um, there are in ancient uh, hieroglyphics, ancient paintings, uh, all of them seem to have UFOs in them or UFO type illustrations in them, and it goes back as to ancient cave drawings. Um, do you think there's those are credible, or or is it just artistic license that the creators of those drawings and hieroglyphs and various things and paintings are just taking, or did they see something?
Well, again, I try to weigh the evidence. For instance, if we go back 5 or 6 thousand years, how would we, living in that time, interpret a comet, for instance, in the sky, and the tail of a fiery object coming across the night sky? And how would we illustrate it? Whether it was, something that we put in sand or on a cave wall. So those sorts of questions of interpretation can cut a lot of different ways. And while I think it's certainly interesting, and I must say right up front that intuitively I have always felt like a visitation occurred in ancient times.
Mm-hmm.
But when I apply critical thinking and just simply analyze the evidence and try to weigh it, I don't come to any firm conclusions. But again, as you point out, there is a history of interpretation of what we see as a species in the sky that certainly lends some credence to the idea that what was seen was what even today we would consider to be otherworldly.
Mm-hmm. Um, there are 95% of the population believes in a divine being of some sort. And I would think most of them, then most of the civilizations have a history that they record as some sort of divine um, um, manufacturing of the planet and putting the people here and the plants and animals. That kind of goes against sort of scientific thought, which suggests that the Big Bang Theory and everything came from that, and there was a primordial soup, and then from that somehow lightning struck it, and then I guess all the fruits and vegetables came out of there, animals come out of there, everything came out of there. Then there's the kind of the third whole topic area where there's external beings of some sort, not necessarily a deity. So there's sort of like three competing ones there, but um, even if there was, say, an alien type of interference, whether seeding or whether altering, it always comes to the question: well, who created them?
Right.
Have you ever pondered that?
Oh, yes. I have from childhood on, not reaching any firm conclusions, but like pondering the nature of infinity. What does infinite really mean? And when we gaze up at the night sky at the stars, and we sense that there's an endless, boundless expanse there. And then what we read based on the science literature tells us that, in fact, infinity is something that could involve multiple universes,
Mm-hmm.
could involve interdimensional sort of travel. That's all still theoretical, but it's reached the level now where even in science terminology, uh, they are exploring those options in speculative ways, which a few decades ago would have been considered off limits.
Mm-hmm. Question came in from our live chat watching the show. Here's says, "Do you believe in God?"
I believe in a divine creator, however one wants to define that. I don't have a definition for myself,
Mm-hmm.
other than there seems to be a pervading energy in the cosmos, which certainly seems to have human beings as a byproduct.
Mm-hmm. There's the abduction phenomena going on, Randall. I'm sure you're aware of that, and there's claims of baby harvesting, impregnation, various things, and So it seems as if they're describing that there's an investigation, scientific investigations going on, but it doesn't really seem that plausible because if it would seem that if aliens could come from light years away, it seems like they would already have the technology they're looking for, would it? Wouldn't it?
If we apply the nuts and bolts idea of faster than light travel and involving physical manifestations, yes, certainly there are a lot of flaws in the books that I've read that tend to accept the alien abduction phenomenon as being real and here and now. But again, if we just by way of speculation apply interdimensional travel,
Mm-hmm.
then we're not talking about traveling light years. We're not talking about coming from some place
Mm-hmm.
in another
Mm-hmm.
universe
Well,
or
there you
part.
go. Well, there's, yeah, I mean, you're talking about tech. You may be talking about technology to fold space. Certainly, that technology, they would have the technology to grow uh, some sort of organic meat suits that they could use. Seems like they're you know coming here and they can't seem to answer that. By the way, we have a poll question on our website. It says, "Do you believe in ancient astronauts?" Their choices are petroglyphs show off world beings. No, the drawings are exaggerations. Giorgio Tertullio's hair says so. Not only ancient, but present. And the other one about ancient astronauts, it says waiting for proof. So here's the results. So 60% say not only ancient aliens, but present aliens. And then 20% says petroglyphs show off world beings as well. A couple votes on George Tertullio's hair. But I got to respect whatever he says because he's got the pen. Okay, he's got the little UFO pen. Anybody got that pen? And it's like a UFO medal. You got to believe whatever they say. So
Mm-hmm.
so it looks like 60% are saying that they believe that the aliens at least are out there, and with revelations say like the Tic Tac videos and other things, and now committees are being established. It seems like they're slow walking disclosure right now.
That's an interesting topic. I'm asked a lot about that, whether or not disclosure is something that is slowly leaking out, uh, as opposed to some revelation in the future that's going to be earth shattering. I wonder, because I've never felt like within the halls of government and the various institutions of the military and the intelligence agencies that they really know what's going on. I've known a lot of people from that world, and they've always expressed a lot of confusion about this realm of UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomenon, as it's now called.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never had faith that there was anyone within the halls of government who knew enough to disclose
Mm-hmm.
enough for us, for our own collective
Have you
confusion.
in your research in your book Alien in the Mirror, have you did you discover some very shocking truth that you had no idea existed out there in the process of writing your book?
I personally investigated a number of different cases. There was a case that goes back to the 1950s that involved a woman in southern Maine who was a channeler and was allegedly channeling an extraterrestrial intelligence. And I went, as I do in the book, in great depth and detail about this case. I also investigated the 1997 Phoenix or Arizona Lights
Mm-hmm.
case, March 13th, 97, and
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of pages of the book talking about that particular case.
Mm-hmm.
So there are individual cases, Daniel, that when I sort of stack them up and outline them on a sheet of paper, that collectively together have sort of a synergy to them in terms of commonalities and the patterns of the nature of the mystery. And so I don't point to any one particular case. I tend to point to a multiple number of cases
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had Dr. Lynn Katai on the show. I think she was pretty well involved with those Phoenix Lights back in the day there. And it wasn't too much longer after that, Randall, that there was something called the Stevensville UFO craft. Were you aware of that one?
Yes, didn't that involve the former President Bush?
Well, it
Wasn't
was
that
in
near his ranch?
well, it was certainly in Texas, and I think it was awful close to there. I mean, this thing, what I remember was that they said it was about a mile wide, and they know that because it blocked out the sky. Of course, there's a lot of
Mhm.
hoaxing from the government on that. First, they said it nothing happened. Then they said people were seeing reflections of another jet. Then they said they had no National Guard craft flying around. Then they said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we just remembered we did, and that's what you saw." I mean, it was just on and on. And then, so if it's just better if the government would just say we don't know, rather than try to gaslight us. I mean, people are too smart for that
Mhm.
these days. There's too many eyewitnesses, too many cell phones taking pictures, and the gaslighting just doesn't work. At least it works in some other topics, but not particularly in that one.
Yes, and Daniel, the old reasons for gaslighting no longer work anymore either. Back in the 1950s, 60s, right into the 80s, the reasons given, as we learned in 1997 when a classified CIA report was released about psychological warfare, that during that period of time, the CIA wanted to confuse the Soviets about what the US government did or did not know about the UFO phenomenon. So, as a result, as was admitted in this 1997 Studies in Intelligence, an internal document of the CIA, when it was released, the confession was made that starting in the 1950s, CIA officers dressed up in Air Force uniforms and went and interviewed witnesses to UFO sightings, especially military pilots and civilian pilots, and tried to convince them that what they had seen was a natural phenomena. Well, at the time, the rationale being used by the CIA in masquerading as Air Force officers was that they wanted to protect secret spycraft like the U-2 and flights from what we now know was Area 51. And at the same time, they wanted, in publicity being given, they wanted to confuse the Russians. And the Soviets were doing the same thing. The Chinese were doing the same thing. It was all a big masquerade in a certain sense. Decades for us to understand the truth based on this 1997 release of the CIA report. And what we now know is that a lot of credible witnesses from the 50s on had their reputations ruined and they were publicly ridiculed. And that was, we now know, shameful, even when it was done in the name of national security.
Did you do any investigation in Project Blue Book?
Yes, I did. I interviewed a number of former Project Blue Book directors as well as scientific advisors like J. Allen Hynek, uh, Colonel Robert Friend, who was one of the Project Blue Book uh, directors for a period of years, was someone I interviewed in this case I mentioned earlier about the woman in the 1950s in southern Maine
Mhm.
who had gotten naval intelligence interested in her case, and a series of naval intelligence officers, as I recount in my book, went and visited her and had sessions with her. And in fact, eventually, she became someone who was brought to the attention of the CIA.
Mhm.
And depending on how much detail you want to go into in this case, it did involve Project Blue Book, as well as these other agencies, Naval Intelligence and the CIA. And it's a mystery to this day as to what happened and the extent to which this woman, who was just an ordinary housewife in southern Maine, the extent to which she really was in touch with what could have been described as an alien intelligence.
Hmm. Um, what do you think about the Betty and Barney Hill story? Is that legit?
I certainly think they're sincere. I think they were ridiculed by debunkers in such a way that it brought, I think, a lot of shame onto the shoulders of debunkers. I knew some of the debunkers that were involved, like Philip Klass and James Oberg and Robert Schaefer and a few of the others. I had a magazine in the late 70s called Second Look, in which we uh, had debunkers as well as believers debating on the pages of the magazine about specific sightings. In fact, the Hill case was one that came up.
Mm-hmm.
And as you well know, it was a pioneering case because it was the first time that psychiatrists were brought in and there was hypnotic regression. And it really opened the door for public discussion for really the first time in a meaningful way about this whole subject of alien abduction.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me mix up the waters here a little bit with a conspiracy theory that is in a class of its own. And this is going to go right to climate change. There have been suggestions that they or them are wanting to come here to this planet and coexist or take over, either one. But they're used to colder temperatures, and they are in league with government officials worldwide, and have suggested to them if they can lower the Earth's temperature, that would make it more comfortable for them. They'll trade technology for us. Hence the worldwide mad rush to try to cool the planet off. What do you think about that?
It's fun to speculate. I have no idea if there's any evidence to support that.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see the evidence. I'd like to apply critical thinking to evaluate what that evidence might be and the impact of it. Again, as you well know, there are a multiplicity of theories and ideas out there, and that's what I tried to do in this book, is to collect them all in one place,
Mm-hmm.
where the ordinary reader can make some assessments of
Mm-hmm.
what feels.
Well, I bet that one is not in your book because it's so far out there. But here's the thing: if you look at the current condition of the world, how things are going in different countries and various things going on, 20 years ago, you would say that's outrageous to suggest the way we live today and what's going on would never happen. Like Russia invading Ukraine, and I mean all the political stuff and all this kind of thing. We would never say that's our country would never go that. But so we have to really think of the most bizarre situation out there and think, well, it's just got as much credibility as anything that we would just sort of a normal progression of thought. Because in 20 years, the unthinkable, unimaginable happens. And so it seems unthinkable and unimaginable that there are aliens that are involved with our governments. And it is interesting that the governments around the world seem to be making the same decisions at the same time, which affects everybody for the same reason. And then there are those who are kind of cheating at that game too, trying to game the system a little bit in their favor. So I'm just suggesting that that's just as plausible as any other theory out there.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you bring that up because just a few hours ago, before our interaction today, I was watching a video from 1964, an interview with Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Mm-hmm.
which really was the movie that set in motion the ancient astronaut theory in many different ways. And Arthur C. Clarke was asked this question about what in his lifetime could he anticipate happening. And he made some comments along the lines of whatever he predicted or whatever we predict at any one time in 10 years would either be found to be too conservative, that we could have gone much further in our prediction about the nature of technology and how it evolves.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, Arthur C. Clarke was talking about how at some point within his lifetime, we would have devices like Dick Tracy on our wrists where we could access most of the world's information,
Mm-hmm.
that we could access each other wherever we were on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
In 1964, that seemed far-fetched, but obviously before Arthur C. Clarke died in 2007, all of that came to pass. So whatever we can predict now via climate change and the forces involved in either accelerating it or in some way attempting to mitigate it, probably would be conservative, as we will discover in the next 2 decades.
Mm-hmm. Um, do you believe that they have retrofitted aircraft to lay down chemical trails to block the sunlight?
I know people, I have friends who actually believe that. I haven't come to any conclusions about
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel. Again, as a journalist, I like to see what the evidence is and weigh it. I haven't seen evidence that convinces me, but I'm not saying that it's impossible.
Seems like I've seen some revelations here recently where they're actually just admitting that they've been doing that. Um, I I mean, as far as evidence goes, I'm not an expert in the field, but I can tell you many times because I keep an eye on the skies for various reasons. But I'll see a plane at a certain altitude just going along, and all of a sudden, now some people say it's a contrail versus a chemtrail. Contrail is described as the normal emissions of a jet aircraft, hot engine hitting cold air, but it seems that it turns on, and it shouldn't turn on. It should either be there or not. Now maybe they could hit a cold spot. I don't know, but I'm always kind of keeping an eye on that. And I notice how that sometimes there are so many lines in the skies, and as they dissipate, it literally creates a haze in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I don't. But myself, I don't want to make this planet habitable for them. Okay, we were here first, or at least we got it. We got it. Okay, and I'm not giving it up. How about you, Randall?
I don't know if we were here first or not. I don't have a sense about that. I'd like to think that, I'm a believer in private property rights. So collectively, the human species should have,
Well, there you
one would
go.
think, in principle, some
Yeah,
private property rights concerning this planet.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. All right, tell us some more about your book. What else you got in there?
Well, if you think of the 5 areas, the book is divided into 5 parts, and the 5 areas are, first of all, the ancient astronaut theories.
Mm-hmm.
Second, UFOs and UFO occupants. The third is contactees and abductees. The fourth area I cover is believers and skeptics and their points of view.
Mm-hmm.
And the fifth and final area I cover in the book is the SETI program, the
Mm-hmm.
science search for extraterrestrial life
Yep.
using radio signals and
Mm-hmm.
the pros and cons in connection with that, since there are certainly some cons from the standpoint of claims that it's a waste of money. So I tried to, in those 5 areas, examine the evolution of all of the ideas and supporting evidence in those areas, dating all the way back to Charles Fort, who in 1919 wrote the first book that really set in motion not only the ancient astronaut theories that von Daniken in particular popularized
Mm-hmm.
decades later, but Charles Fort, where we got the term Fortean phenomena that's used today, examined everything that was odd, the oddities that science sort of chucked aside, thinking that it was too strange to really investigate.
Mm-hmm.
Things like fish falling from the sky on cloudless days, or red rain, and he just collected all of these oddities. And so from 1919 on, all of the other authors pretty much stood in his shadow and walked in his footsteps, especially starting in the 1940s, when the 1947 in particular, when the UFO phenomenon with Roswell and
Mm-hmm.
Kenneth Arnold and the sightings of the 9, what he called flying saucers near Mount Rainier in Washington. When all of that hit the airwaves and became newspaper headlines, then the cultural phenomenon truly began. But there were inklings of it decades before with people like Charles Fort, who spent most of his time in the New York Public Library, going through newspapers clippings, looking for oddities. And that's, I think, how true science comes about and true discoveries are made.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have uh, an alien in the mirror, but a lot of times I feel like aliens are watching me. It might be a mirror of their eyeball, man, because I feel like I'm exposing their dark and dirty efforts to take over this planet. But by the way, you've seen this video here, or at least this picture here of the Tic Tac video. But what you may not know is I've actually got software. I was able to zoom in on this and take a look at this craft. Let me go ahead and show it to you now. What that craft really is, it'll appear on the right. So there's what I found. Zooming in. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Does that look familiar?
Well, it looks like it's out of Star Trek.
Well, it could be, man. I mean, I'm thinking it's the USS Enterprise and the movie from Gene Roddenberry. I mean, that they just actually have came back from time, and they made the movie back in the 60s to tell us that they were coming, and this is their craft. You can see plainly the same angle is clearly the same craft, but we really have to kind of check our sources a lot of times to make sure that they are correct. If there was contact, is the United States automatically the people, the government, the country that they would like to present themselves to, or do you think there's a better candidate country for that?
I've never been an adherent to the "take me to your leader" perspective in connection with how contact would evolve. Uh, my feeling is, and this is intuitive, is that the first contact would be with whales and dolphins, or maybe the
Mm-hmm.
octopus
Mm.
species, some other species on the planet that has some level of intelligence that might well be more resonant with the visitors and with what they would want uh, to see Earth represented by.
Mm. It's interesting. It seems like I saw a movie one time where um, they were on a ship and they were saying that the whales were telling them the aliens were there or something. I can't remember what the name of that movie was, but it seems like it's incorporated in there. But let me ask you, there's another thing. Of course, there's a lot of movies out there. One of them that comes to mind is Prometheus, but there's several movies like that that have some sort of octopus connection to it. Another one, I don't know, it was called The Interpreter or something. I'm not sure what it was. It was these aliens were behind this big glass and they brought this interpreter to try to interpret what they said. They look like octopuses. And I'm just wondering, have you seen any connection or why an octopus is used in a science fiction movie to depict alien contact?
Well, I do know based on my reading, a lot of oceanographers and a lot of biologists have long been fascinated with the octopus species, not only because each of its arms has a mini brain, it's a combination of brains that collectively create a consciousness, but because the octopus species seems so out of place in the ocean and on this planet, and there's
Mm-hmm.
innumerable reasons why that they give. And so I've seen the speculation in the scientific literature that if there is a candidate species in the animal kingdom for an alien visitor or an alien implant here as a species on the planet, it would be the octopus.
Wow.
And so it doesn't surprise me that it would appear in so much of science fiction.
Hmm. Um, so how do you consider the octopus an out of place species?
Well, I don't. I'm just saying, based on what I've read, scientists in their speculations, they just find that there's so much about it. Uh, Again, starting with each arm having its own mini brain,
Oh,
and how those brains together interact in a sort of collective consciousness way. That was the first point of fascination
mm-hmm,
for many scientists.
mm-hmm,
And then beyond that, it's their eyes. It's how they seem to be so adaptable
mm-hmm,
and so aware,
mm-hmm.
and they give every evidence of being right up there with whales and dolphins in
Yeah.
terms of intelligence.
Well,
And then,
if they had to steer a ship, they'd have a lot of arms to grab a hold of the steering wheel. Hey, in your book, in section 3, it says, "What are they trying to tell us?" Randall, what are they trying to tell us?
lots of points of view on that one, as you know, Daniel. The phenomenon itself tells us a lot about us and who we are and who we are evolving into as a species. As I pointed out earlier, in terms of the connection of the title of the book, Alien in the Mirror, and what does that mean? You know, Jacques Vallée looked in his book, Passport to Magnolia, at the effect this phenomenon has had on cultures and in the mythologies of cultures. And I suspect, based on my intuitive feeling about this whole subject, is that it works both ways. That the phenomenon itself, whatever we're seeing mysterious in the sky, is reacting to us as much as we are reacting to it. It's as if there's an interactive consciousness exchange going on between us and it. And I
Mm,
say it
mm-hmm,
because lack of a better term as to what it might truly be. Um, but the point being, I think part of our evolutionary trajectory is about the self discovery of our own true nature as a species, as seen, reflected through this mystery in the sky.
mm-hmm. Do you think humans are evolving, or are we devolving?
Well, some humans I certainly think are evolving, and some are evolving. We see this it cuts
Yeah.
several different
Okay.
ways, but the potential is there for evolution, genetically as well as culturally and psychologically. The potential is always there for us to continue evolving. But certainly technology is evolving
Mm-hmm.
as to whether it's smart technology or not, whether we have the wisdom to harness and guide the technology that's evolving, artificial intelligence being one good example. That's another question entirely.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do aliens evolve? Are they at their maximum evolutionary state? I mean, the typical depicted alien, kind of like the one peeping in the window here, uh, usually bald, big black eyes, usually don't wear any clothes, and no noticeable ears, no other bodily parts noticed. So, I mean, beyond that, I mean, if you keep evolving, it seems kind of reminds me of like a Star Trek episode where they show that the thinking as far in the future as you can, you just have a brain in a cover, and and that's it. And I think there's even others that project further than that, where you don't even need a brain. You're not like a spirit, but some kind of entity that's just floating around in a cosmic kind of cloud. You've seen, I don't know how many episodes of Star Trek was like that. I think they're trying to project out what it would be if you evolved so far in the future. And I don't know what do you think's after just a ball of energy, Randall? I mean, I can't think further than that. What else would you be?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly energy. Let's think about ball lightning, and in the 60s and 70s, a lot of debunkers and skeptics tried to make a case that UFOs were examples of ball lightning. Well, ball lightning we know exists. It's very rare, uh, but we've seen examples of where ball lightning is associated with legitimate sightings of non-ball lightning craft, seemingly. So, Daniel, you're a very provocative guy. You ask some interesting questions. But I must confess, I've been interviewed dozens of times for this book, and no one has raised some of the angles that you have. And I appreciate provocateurs and provocative thinking
Wow.
questions.
Okay. Well, all right. I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah. I mean, that's
Indeed, it is. Indeed, it is.
thank you very much, Randall. And certainly, I think we like when I was describing the Star Trek thinking past. I mean, there's these sort of standard questions, but somehow we got to press forward. We got to keep pressing forward and find out. For instance, in your books, how are they trying to tell us? Well, we should have that discussion because I think we're well beyond. Are they here? It has to be now. Why are they here? And project plausible ideas that can lead us and really it's also it would be self discovery as well when you kind of think about that. Where are we heading as a species ourselves? And now it was very 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 diplomatic of you to say there's some that are evolving and some that are not and digressing, and that's very good. That keeps you out of hot water. I thrive in hot water, so I'm thinking there's more digression than there is progression. As I look across the earthly landscape here, there are other movies about infinite amount of movies about alien contact. Some of them depict that they're here to gather our resources. Do you address that in any context, or have you researched that or looked into that?
Well, certainly I summarize a lot of books that tend to go in that direction about harvesting genetic resources, resources in connection with the minerals and so forth. All of that has been covered in great detail in many other books, which I tend to summarize.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to a point you just made, Daniel, I mentioned earlier 1975 as being an important year for the publication of books in this realm. And if we looked at that Billy Graham and those two evangelicals who had totally different takes on what the UFO phenomenon was. Billy Graham, the optimist in him, seeing that angelic forces were at work. And then the other two who were more fear-based in what they felt was happening, seeing satanic forces at work. And that sort of schism right there, just in Christianity, sort of magnifies the schism in all the other frames of reference and points of view in this phenomenon. It's so difficult to get a handle on it. And it's easy for people to become hardcore in their point of view. I had someone contact me just today, for instance, who said that my book was basically BS because I didn't have a particular point of view. I didn't have a specific experience that I would wrap my ideas and the evidence supporting the ideas around. And this particular person had a particular point of view based on his experience, that he felt he had been abducted, that they had given him a special clearance for special information, and it had to do with which species were here and why they were here and so forth. And my response was, that's fine that you feel that way, but you don't have to feel that you're an evangelic sort of person as a result to convince other people that what you're experiencing was true for us as well. It was true for you, but you put you on a pedestal with thousands of other people that have other experiences that they've had that are very different interpretations. And again, that's what I tried to do in this book, is to show all the different perspectives and interpretations that are out there, and let each reader make up their own mind about what feels true.
Interesting angle on that. Um, are aliens making the crop circles and mutilating cows?
I cover that from the standpoint of summarizing books that cover it. Again, I don't have a particular point of view. I think the evidence is interesting. About my father was a cattle rancher, and I remember when he was alive. Uh, I grew up in Texas on a cattle ranch, and my father uh, he raised Black Angus, and whenever the cattle mutilations in the 1970s were publicized, he was rather cynical about it. He says, "Oh, there's probably an insurance angle here. You know, these cattle they were probably diseased, and then they were mutilated, and it's a way to scam the insurance companies." Well, I didn't necessarily take that for granted. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily believe that, but I thought it was an interesting point of view from someone that was in the industry, who
Mm-hmm.
actually was involved
Yeah.
with cattle, and you know, who would see that as a possibility. And it gets Daniel to what I discuss in the book, whether it's about crop circles or about cattle mutilations, and that
Mm-hmm.
is uh, the different points of view between believers and skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is that most people that call themselves skeptics are really cynics. They're really people with a sort of sniveling disbelief in virtue. They're people that jump to conclusions about the veracity and the integrity of people that have had unusual experiences or have seen unusual things in the sky, and who have been a witness or even been victimized by cattle mutilations, for instance.
Mm-hmm. The
So
only the only movie that really depicted sort of a dialogue, but it was sort of a one way dialogue, was Contact with Jodie Foster, where they downloaded instructions how to build something,
mhm.
and they definitely uh, used uh, um, communication that we could understand, and that. But if there was to be meaningful dialogue with them, what form do you think it would take?
I have this feeling, and again, it's intuitive, that it would be a transfer of information via a merger of consciousness, an energy merger of consciousness. I mean, obviously, we are light beings. That's been acknowledged now. You know, we're made of photons of light,
Mm-hmm.
and we're electromagnetic, and we operate in that way. And I just have a sense that the downloads of information maybe have been occurring throughout human evolutionary history. That these downloads of information might have yielded the Leonardo da Vinci's, for instance, or in Egyptian times, the Imhoteps, the creator, the architect of the step pyramid at Zoser, or whatever genius has occurred at any one time, you can
Mm-hmm.
ascribe it, as the ancient astronaut theorists do, to an intervention, direct or indirect, by alien visitors who were manipulating our gene pool, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Um, do you have any knowledge of the Aldebaran mystery? Did I say that right? Aldebaran mystery?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, let's get to another one. This is from Rose. Said, I heard a conspiracy theory that they created alien human hybrids to replace the human race with these hybrids. What do you think about that?
Well, David Jacobs has written several books on this subject, which I summarize in my own book. And he evolved these theories. He was one of the first, I believe, uh, to
Mm-hmm.
think in terms of asking the why of an hybrid program. Why would this be underway? And he came to the conclusion based, again, perhaps as a fear-based conclusion that he reached. But however he came about with that conclusion, it was that the hybrids were here to replace humans, and that was the entire motive behind this program that was initiated not by one particular species, but by competing extraterrestrial species that were visitors here and were in some sort of like an arms race in order to influence our own species.
Mm-hmm. Um, do you believe we have a quantum brain computer?
That we, as in our country, the
Well,
United States, has a quantum.
QB, maybe clarify that question. Say, do you believe we have a quantum brain computer? Well, we certainly have a quantum computer, right? And this is interesting because the guy that invented the D-Wave quantum computer said that that when it's running, it seems to have a heartbeat. Have you heard that quote?
Vaguely, yes, that rings a bell.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big bell, but it does ring one.
All right. Grumpy Army vet. By the way, if you are an Army vet, we had Veterans Day, so thank you for your service. But do you have any knowledge about treaties between our governments and the aliens?
I cover that in the book based on other authors who have claims made about these sorts of treaties. In fact, I mentioned earlier being contacted by someone just today who didn't like my book because it didn't have this strong point of view. And one of the points he made was you didn't cover the treaties between the United States government and the Galactic Federation. And my response again was all I can do, I don't have firsthand information about any of that. And all I can do really is to summarize the work of other authors that do, just to give you the input and the opportunity to weigh it.
Now, I don't think that we have got controversial enough. So let's go ahead and get even more controversial with this question that just come in. Do you believe aliens eat humans?
Do I believe that aliens eat humans?
Yeah.
I don't have a belief. I keep going back to this. I'm a journalist, and I am someone that.
Okay, well,
If Socrates was alive today, I would be at the feet of Socrates in order to ask questions.
Okay,
and questions that don't necessarily have answers.
So are you familiar with the Twilight Zone episode "To Serve Man"?
Yes, I am. I've seen it many times.
One of my favorite ones ever, especially when you're running up there. Doctor, stop! It's a cookbook.
That's right.
Now, again,
I always wanted to read a more in-depth version, like a mini book based on that plot, to find out what sort of spices were used. I was always curious.
Right.
Cannibalism usually was pretty raw.
Yeah, I mean, you gonna fry them, bake them, put them in a stew? I don't know.
Right.
But that sounds, again, like I said in the first hour, sometimes we just have to throw out unbelievably ridiculous ideas because we're so used to the boxed ideas that come that we can't really advance because we're just going around in circles, so getting out of the box thinking. Now, I had a guy on this show. This show's been going on since 2003. And he worked for the British military intelligence. And he claimed on this show and others that they transport, there are ships that have boxes, 10 by 10 boxes. And inside those boxes are body parts of humans. And that these body parts are used to feed the aliens. And his credentials are correct. Now, you would say his theory is so outrageous, it's unbelievable. But then I could say, wait a minute, they're talking about UFOs going underneath the water, coming up out and going and flying right next to ships. That seems unbelievable too. But
Mhm.
it's not unbelievable. That's been reported widely, and now there's a whole category, even within the government, and their sort of slow walking disclosure of underwater UFOs. They have another name for them. I don't know what it is, but they have sort of an all encompassing description.
Submersibles.
So it is possible that they are, in fact, harvesting humans for lunch. Randall Fitzgerald.
Well, you mentioned the Twilight Zone. That was my favorite series growing up in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And my younger brother, his favorite series was The Outer Limits.
Oh,
And
nice.
we used to have this debate of which is more plausible, what we see on the Twilight Zone or on Outer Limits.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd go back and forth. And it really was a way to get a sense of where someone was coming from, whether they had a preference for the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for other people, I mean, both were really out there. It didn't there wasn't really any distinguishing features between the two series other than
Mm-hmm.
imagination.
Mm-hmm. Um, and it's interesting. If you look at most science fiction movies today, they almost seem like just redos somewhere between Star Trek, Twilight Zone, or Outer Limits. Have you ever noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering
Yep.
why it is they seem to have had more originality and forward thinking of these kinds of subjects then, but not so much now.
Rod Serling. Rod Serling was a mad genius. The chain smoking mad genius Rod Serling.
Yeah.
Most of the Twilight Zone came from his imagination, and I think there are a few examples in science fiction of true pioneers. Now, Arthur
Mm-hmm.
C. Clarke is one with
Mm-hmm.
2001: A Space Odyssey,
Mm-hmm.
which, when I saw it in 1969, was one of the, I won't say a life changing or life altering event to see that movie, but it certainly set me on the course of speculating
Mm-hmm.
about what is possible and what could have happened in pre-history. And it's one of those films that I never get tired of watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love 2001: A Space Odyssey. What do you think about 2010: A Space Odyssey?
Uh, as sequels go, it was okay. I read the book, and I think the book was better than the movie.
Yeah. It just seems to me it's kind of like to me the Matrix. The first Matrix was the absolute best, and then it got crappier and crappier and crappier. They just couldn't recapture the magic. Um, then they had to have Neo and Trinity get together. That blew that up. That it was great to have that tension there, but then they went ahead and did it, and it was a gross depiction of it. So I was like, get out of here, man! You can't do it. Um, in your book, you talk about angels. Were they angels? You put them in quotes who bestowed civilization. What's your take on that?
Well, depending on whether you want to look at that subject, the ancient astronaut subject, from a religious perspective. If you do, you had mentioned intelligent design earlier in our discussion. And if intelligent design was intended to bring about a stage of religious, spiritual evolution, and that angels were like the gardeners who were sent here to help create a foundation for a more spiritual planet and species, then yes, I could see everything in the ancient astronaut theory lending credence to that idea.
Mm-hmm. Um, it seems to me that UFOs over time seem to be. We were talking about evolution. Their design seems to be evolving. It seems like in the 50s they sort of had a 50s design, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there something to that maybe that's just a cultural thing?
Well, getting back to Jacques Vallée and Passport to Magonia, which was the pioneering book in terms of raising those questions about the cultural artifacts of this phenomenon, and whether it was culture that created the collective unconscious projecting these UFOs in the sky, or whether, in fact, the phenomenon was shaping the cultural perspective, or whether it was both, going back and forth, interactive seeding, so to speak. I tend to think, and this is again intuitive, it's not based on any strong convictions, but I tend to think that it was a interactive seeding back and forth, and it continues to be, just like the shape of UFOs. You know, you had the Foo Fighters in World War II that were just like, you know, ball lightning, you know, balls
Mm-hmm.
of light,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was the Kenneth Arnold 1947 saucers, and then we progressed into triangles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look at Arizona Lights in
Mm-hmm.
1997.
Have you ever heard of have you ever heard of Chase Kloski?
I'm sorry.
Have you ever heard of Chase Kloski?
No, I
Okay.
must confess.
All right.
No.
All right. That's okay. Obviously, if you don't know, just say you don't know. It doesn't matter. We'll just move on. But I'll tell you
I
about.
don't know. I don't
Okay.
know, Daniel.
Well,
I'm innocent.
I'll tell you. She was a guest on this show, and she worked with several organizations regarding uh, documenting UFOs and UFO activity. But she was the one guest that came face to face with an alien in a farmer's field with her crew while they were filming. And so, but I won't go on into that. But if you ever want to look her up on our website, just put her name in there, because it's first hand view. Because most people that have seen UFOs or know about UFOs are reading the internet, or they know somebody who saw something, or they heard of somebody saying something. So she's singularly the one that we've ever had on a show that actually uh, came across that. So, and now that also brings it to another question. Many people say that when there is UFO sightings in general, there are um, uh, there are presence of other entities on the ground, such as Bigfoot. Have you ever heard that?
Oh, yes, yes. And I've read lots of speculations and theories that, again, Bigfoot is interdimensional, which is why we don't find bodies of Bigfoot,
Mm-hmm.
that it's an entity that manifests much like UFOs going from one dimension to another and becoming physical or
Mm-hmm.
semi-physical, and then taking an energy light form and um, morphing back
Mm-hmm.
into another dimension.
Do you think that all of our technology, as it is advancing, is strictly, and I don't know what that there's a, you might know this. It's where they say technology will multiply. There's a word for that or a phrase for that. But is it simply the humans evolving and doubling their technology, or do you think that we're getting help?
Interesting question. And what form does that help come? If we think about the nature of intuition and human intuition, and how there, whatever one thinks about parapsychology, that there are exchanges of information at the energy level between human beings uh, that we consider to be intuitive. It's like when a scientist in one part of the planet gets an idea, a brainstorm about a discovery, and another scientist, another part of the planet, about the same time, gets the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Today, they can collaborate using the internet. But decades ago, when there wasn't that opportunity to collaborate, except when they met in person at conferences or something, then there wasn't an opportunity for the evolution of those ideas to occur quickly. And now, because we're wired together, our nervous systems are like wired together through the technology of computers and smartphones. These sorts of ideas percolate much more quickly, and the discoveries are coming much more quickly. And so the question is a legitimate one to be raised. whether or not through our intuitive faculties we're somehow linked together and channeling, the old idea of the Akashic records, that there's some greater resource of information that humans periodically tap into. And are we doing it through, in Jungian terms, the collective unconscious? And if so, it gets back to your question, aliens are visiting, who created the aliens? Who or what is feeding this Akashic record resource that we tap into periodically for these great discoveries?
There's been a lot of talk of late of the use of nuclear weapons. Now that could actually smoke out the alien component here, because some have claimed that and says there is evidence of alien activity or UFO activity disarming nuclear weapons. So do you suspect that if one of these rogue countries, everybody's trying to get a nuke, if they try it, you suspect that they're going to interfere again, that they're going to stop it, or you think they're just going to let it happen?
Let's go back and look for a moment at the origins of the contactee movement, starting in the 1940s and then the early 50s with George Adamski and all of the many other contactees, people who said that they were in contact with extraterrestrial visitors. The message that was always allegedly relayed to them was that the aliens were here because we had developed nuclear weapons and we were an immature species. We were going to abuse this technology that we were developing, and that the planet was in peril. Well, the contactees were pretty consistent with this message, that the planet was in peril and that nuclear weapons were the reason, going right up through the 1960s. And then with the abduction phenomenon, when it began and sort of supplanted contactees in terms of the popular imagination, then we started seeing an evolution in what the message was. And then the message was less about nuclear weapons, but more about contamination of the planet as a result of human activities in a whole variety of realms. So if we use history as a guide about the messaging, then in answer to your question, it's possible that there would simply be a whole new stage of messaging as a result of the tendency to use tactical nuclear weapons, like with Russia in Ukraine. And then, we can hope, the optimist in me would hope that if indeed there is interference ongoing on the part of an extraterrestrial visitation species, that they would stop somehow this from occurring, either through influencing the mind of Vladimir Putin about whether it should be done, or whatever.
Like a Vulcan mind probe. Or let me ask you this. Let me ask you, it's been stories forever of aliens giving humans technology in exchange for abductions, and then they renege and just start pulling people up and doing whatever they want willy-nilly. But it's always seems like they're giving us something. They give us technology or whatever. If you were in charge of a group that was to give something to the aliens from only something the humans know or can do, what would that one thing be that we say that they can learn from us?
It is the potential for the capacity of empathy and compassion. Compassion is the action part of empathy. And if we look at our species and how we treat animals, for instance, irrespective of how we treat each other or how we treat children or whatever, but just looking at animals and our treatment of species that are intelligent, much less those that seem to be on the intelligence quotient scale, much less intelligent.
So do you think that empathy could benefit the aliens?
Conceivably, but it may also be that empathy and compassion is something that we haven't demonstrated as a species sufficiently
Mm-hmm.
to where we are seen as deserving of the ultimate gifts that an visiting alien species might be able to give us.
Mm-hmm. It seems like the highest uh, sort of pronouncement of that would be found in the Bible, where it says, love conquers all, love is above all." So if empathy is good, but the ability to love, I think, is the highest form of the human condition, is as unconditional love. Certainly, we get that from our dogs. We can learn something from them. But I'm not saying if we were wait till we're perfect to give them something. I was just saying if we could give them something that we already possess or that we aspire to, because I think that's part of what you're saying is, well, we need to aspire to something, then we'll share it with them. But I just say we share it with them. We're still working on it, but we know what it is. The highest of that is love. But so, I think that would be part of the dialogue we were talking about in your book. How would the dialogue take place? But in most of the science fiction movies about abductions, from Travis Walton to Dark Skies, various other ones, where there's alien abduction and they're doing scientific experiments on the humans, they're usually on a table. They always have this, and I think Fire in the Sky showed it pretty good, that they don't have any emotion when they're drilling into your eyeball. It's like, and if you're screaming and stuff, they always depict them as, like they're puzzled. Like, why are they screaming? Because I'm sticking a needle in their eye or something. It's just kind of weird. By the way, I got a little aside here. Somebody asked me, I'm a beekeeper, so they want to know how my bees was. So I got to address that. My bees are doing fine. Thanks for asking. They're kind of getting into sort of hibernation mode right now. I took a lot of honey from them, but I left some for them, so they should make it. So thanks for asking about the bees. Then we have this clarification for you, Randall. It's about going back to the quantum brain. They clarified and said, do humans have quantum brains?
Oh, yeah, that's like the question of, do humans have holographic brains? There was the book some decades ago, The Holographic Universe, in which Michael Talbot, the author, speculated that we live in a holographic universe, and much like the Matrix, this was many years before the Matrix appeared, that in fact holography was going to be the future, and then we have this now with the meta universe, and with the headsets. This is all sort of the baby steps in that direction. But I would see it linked together, the quantum brain and the holographic effects from a quantum brain as revealed in our consensus reality.
Because we're talking about emotions there, about what could we share with our, and I don't, I kind of hesitate to say our space brothers, okay, because it ain't my space brothers, but the people out there. What can humans share? And that kind of reminded me of the movie, I think it was called The Forgotten. And in that movie, there's a lot of movies actually called Forgotten, but this was an alien movie. What happened was these children disappeared from all these parents, and these parents didn't know they had children that were taken. They went on about their lives, but one woman kept thinking, "Wait a minute, I got a son somewhere. Where's my son?" And everybody said that you're crazy, and it's, send her to a psychologist, and they try to talk her out of it. Turned out the whole thing was the aliens was trying to find out what the bond was between the mother and the child, because it's obviously something they were not capable of, that emotional connection. But they were able to break that. It was interesting. They were able to break that emotional connection with all the other parents. And then she finally convinced one guy that he had a daughter, and he discovered that because he was in his room and he saw something on the wall, and he started pulling back the layer of wallpaper, and then he stepped back. It was crayon drawing from his daughter that he had. They took the memory out, but it came back when he saw that. But so it's interesting, but it seems like they are emotionless beings, but all the experimentation that we kind of hear about, it seems to be reproductive in nature, but maybe they need to be getting into the emotional part, and maybe they would stop taking our, and by the way, you talk about cattle mutilations and stuff. Now, me being a cowboy, I don't take kindly no cattle being mutilated. Just
No,
saying.
nor do I, and I don't eat meat.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So, have you found in your research, are there more contactees coming out, or more contacts happening? Is there any kind of increase, or you think it's just the same number of events happening that we seem to be more involved because we're actually looking for them?
Well, I've seen attempts at surveys. I mean, Whitley Strieber and David Jacobs and a few of the others have made various attempts to do surveys to see whether the phenomenon is much more intense now than it was. And I think the evidence is sort of mixed. It depends on what culture you're in. There are certain countries now that uh, didn't have, at least publicly, this phenomenon occurring just a generation ago, and now they do. It's almost like it comes in ebbs and flows of waves. So it's so hard to track. I don't know that there's, through the internet, an international repository for keeping track of the incidents. I think that's a worthwhile goal for some philanthropists to fund.
Mm-hmm. You posed the question, why in the book, Alien in the Mirror, why are we being manipulated? But isn't that by nature? If we are being manipulated, would we even know it?
No, that's a good point. We probably wouldn't. We're not evolved enough as a species, much less as individuals, to know when we're fully being manipulated. Just look at advertising and how subtle advertising can be in manipulating our preferences.
Mm-hmm.
We, and getting back to artificial intelligence, because you raised a point and the wheels are sort of spinning ever since. Part of the debate right now about artificial intelligence is whether or not it can ever be imbued with empathy and compassion
Mm-hmm.
and with unconditional love and the whole spectrum of emotions. And so it's a raging, ongoing debate. There's no finality to it, certainly probably not in our lifetimes. But if we project that debate onto extraterrestrial visitors, if indeed they're here, and they have sent, instead of themselves, their form of robots, for instance. They're biological robots that are without emotion and that are without unconditional love. And so, what we would show as empathy, compassion, unconditional love would be of interest to them because they don't have yet the capacity evolved for it, just like we don't in our own artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Seems like empathy. If that was a goalpost or a signage of human evolution, that would be that would, I'm thinking that we're going backwards on that one. So we need to
In some respects, but there
but
are.
there's a word out there, Randall, that's been batted about called mass psychosis, um,
Mhm.
and it seems that humans are very easily manipulated, like you said. Now that really goes back to commercials. I think there was even laws passed because they were putting these flasher points,
Subliminals, yeah,
and
subliminal
so
influences.
it seems like we're easily manipulated. And I've always said, I'd rather know that they're trying to manipulate me than for me to have my opinion changed. And I don't know why I believe what I believe. But the one defense for that I have found is information, is doing your own research. Because if we take things in sound bites, we're never going to get anywhere as far as closer to the truth, whatever that truth is. And then everybody on this planet seems like they're looking for some kind of truth.
Mhm.
Um, and I've always had this kind of debate with a lot of guests over time that if truth exists, and I think we can all agree that truth does exist, then no matter where you start from, we should all end up at the same truth. because I personally, now you may have a different view of it, but I don't believe that there's a personal truth, because that doesn't make it truth. That if you say, well, my truth is the sky is blue, well, my truth is gray. Only one can really be right. There's, if it is truth, there's a defining point for that. And
Mm-hmm.
but to me, that covers a lot of subjects, whether it be extraterrestrials or Bigfoot or um, ghost or any of those subjects. They have to come to the same point in order to be truth. What's your particular view? Does everybody have a personal truth, or is there a singular truth that no matter where you come from comes to the same place?
Maybe as a species, we are programmed genetically to have a particular point of view. Like, what do all of the religions throughout history have in common? Whether it's Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or tribal pagan religions, what do they all have in common? It's mysticism.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It is the capacity within the human brain that we each have individually and as a species to project a mystical interpretation on life itself and on the reasons for life and the
Mm-hmm.
meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much else that's in common
Mm-hmm.
between all of the various religions of the world except a mystical tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, we are mystical beings.
Mm-hmm.
We are living out in physical form a spiritual dimension. And that spiritual dimension is as mystics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for many of the people that get truly immersed in the alien abduction or alien visitation or UFO phenomena, uh, those people are mystics too.
Mm-hmm.
They're searching for answers. They're searching for a commonality of purpose and a commonality of a point of view for all of humanity.
Mm-hmm. There is that conversation about our so-called ancient ancestors, and here's a depiction of that. Let's just use this one for whatever reason, but that. And you mentioned mysticism, but some have suggested that the mysticism evolved because the early ancestors couldn't explain various things, so they had to come up with this idea that there was a godlike figure there that's causing it, causes a seed to come out of the ground, causes the rain to come down. So they sort of, the mysticism came up through there. But I argue the point that the ancient caveman, he looks around, he sees a woolly mammoth, he sees a tree, he gets rained on, he sees lightning, and he goes running for the cave. There's nothing in nature that gives him the idea that there is an entity, a divine creator. There's nothing out there in there. So it's like imagining the color retron. Well, what color is retron? Well, you don't know because you haven't seen it. So therefore it wouldn't come into your mind. You can't have a conversation with a color that doesn't exist or that you haven't seen. So in order for you to know about retron, somebody has to show you that. So my suggestion is there's nothing in nature that tells the ancients that there is a God or a divine creator, that knowledge had to come externally because there's nothing in nature that suggests that anything was created.
But I believe, here I'm using the word belief for the first time in this interview. Uh, I believe because I have felt that we are a hopeful species and always have been. We hope, whether it's 10,000 years ago as hunter gatherers, that we would find our next meal for tomorrow. We had that hope. We had the hope that we would survive long enough to see our progeny grow up. It's a continuation of hope for the species that's kept us going. And I believe that hope, that sense of optimism, is one of the redeeming features for us.
Mm-hmm. So where do you think, if they didn't get the idea of a godlike deity from nature, where did that idea come from?
I think it's programmed into us. It's part of our genetic heritage. Um, we don't know yet, for instance, in the animal kingdom, whether monkeys, baboons have a sense that there is another life after death. We don't know that yet. There is some evidence that some species do bury their dead. Some species have rituals around death,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which would seem to indicate that there is some sort of collective belief or sensibility.
Mm-hmm. Or it
Much
could
like
be, for instance, in the case of elephants, elephants have a funeral procession, which is one of the most
yes,
amazing things in nature. I've seen elephants cry too as well, which indicates emotions, and I've seen emotions in other animals as well. But it could also be that the animal kingdom is aware of a creator being as well, because they're emulating the sadness or the emotions that was designed into them. But if you're talking about, say, caveman, and if we go with the evolutionary route, he came out of a swamp, he turned into a monkey. You said something programmed into us. Still, that programming has to come externally. It isn't evolutionized into us. It's something was put in there. Something was dropped into our sphere, into our humankind. Well, listen, Randall Fitzgerald, we're getting near the end of the broadcast. Got your book here in the background. Where can people get it, and anything else you'd like to say about it?
Oh, it's available on Amazon and my website, Alien in the Mirror, which will tell you more about the book. Uh, the foreword is written by Jacques Vallée. Jacques still writes books. He
Oh,
is, one of the elders in this realm. For anyone who's ever read one of his books, you know how provocative he is, and I was honored. I've been honored to have him as a friend for almost 50 years now, and he agreed to write the foreword to the book. And if you read the book for no reason other than uh, I would recommend it, reading it for the introduction by Jacques.
okay. All right. Then I want to express my thanks for your kind compliments earlier in the broadcast, where you
Oh well,
so
you're well deserving, Daniel. You're a provocative man, and I appreciate that curiosity.
okay. All right. Well, Randall, I appreciate you coming on the Edge broadcast. I'll send you links after the editing and upload.
Happy trails.
All right. Bye bye.